When Zionist settlers began arriving in the 1880s, the Palestinian population already numbered around 450,000 Arabs and 20,000 Jews.
كانوا اليهود موجودين يهود حقيقيين من اليهود اللي غير متطرفين، يعني كانوا مستقيمين وكانوا يعرفوا إنه أنا إلي حق إني أعيش هون مثل ما إله هو حق يعيش هون.
لما أجوا هذول تبعين الغرب هن اللي خربوا الدنيا وهجرونا.
During World War I, the Zionist movement scored a major victory. The British Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour declared support for the creation of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. A few weeks later, the British Army conquered Jerusalem and began implementing the Balfour Declaration. In the early years of the movement, calls for removing Arabs from Palestine were not often made publicly by Zionist leaders. But as larger and larger groups of Jews began arriving in the country, discussions about encouraging the native population to leave by purchasing their land or through other means began to spill into the open. In the 1920s, thousands of Arabs became homeless after Zionists purchased their land out from under them by making deals with wealthy landlords from nearby countries. The rise of Hitler in the 1930s led to a massive increase in Jewish immigration to Palestine. The Arabs watched the arrival of more and more Zionists, saw the growing number of those who had lost their homes, and heard pronouncements by some Zionist leaders that they had plans to one day outnumber the Arabs.
The Arabs revolted. In 36, 39, they revolted against the British and against the Zionist presence.
The leadership of the Zionist movement and the leadership of the Palestinian Arab population. They both have made the same diagnosis of their situation, and this is what they understand, that the establishment of any type of Jewish state in any part of Palestine where there was going to be a Jewish majority necessarily required the large-scale displacement of Palestinian Arabs.
Early Zionism thought you can actually buy the Palestinians out. You can buy bits of the land here, you push them out, gradually you push them into Transjordan. By the mid-30s, the key figures within the leadership realized the only way to do it is to do it on a mass scale, to engineer it.
In 1940, Yosef Weitz wrote in his diary, "The only way is to transfer the Arabs from here to neighboring countries. All of them, except perhaps Bethlehem, Nazareth, and Old Jerusalem. Not a single village or a single tribe must be left." As the Second World War broke out, flight from Europe only became more desperate. In Palestine, even before World War II began, it was clear that war was on the horizon. After crushing the Arab revolt and exiling the leaders of the Arab community, the British decided to take some action to address the concerns of Arabs in Palestine.
And this pushed the British into gradually stopping Jewish immigration. What this meant to the Jews was that the path of achieving statehood through majority, through gaining a Jewish majority here, was blocked.
At the time, there were two Zionist militias in Palestine. The Haganah was far larger and better equipped, but the Irgun was more radical. The Irgun refused to accept the British decision to restrict immigration into the country.
So we started to fight against them.
The King David Hotel was the headquarters of the British government in Palestine. Its bombing in 1946 by the Irgun was by far the largest attack in the Zionist campaign against the British and was a massive shock to Palestine. It left 91 people dead, including Britons, Arabs, and Jews. In 1947, the British gave up on trying to find a solution between the Zionist settlers and the native population. Exhausted from World War II, the British declared that they would leave Palestine and handed the problem over to the United Nations. At the UN, a committee decided that the best way forward was to split Palestine in two, giving one state to the Jews and the other to the Arabs. Jerusalem would become a separate entity administered by the UN. The Jewish community in Palestine had skyrocketed throughout the Zionist movement. But in 1947, it still only represented 1/3 of Palestine's population and owned less than 7% of the land. The United Nations partition plan called for giving 56% of the country to the Jewish state. This proposal shocked the Arab community. Not only would the Jews receive over half of Palestine, but they were also receiving most of the land suitable for farming.
Nobody felt that this was a fair deal.
The overwhelming majority, more than 55% of a country that had a 2/3 Arab majority, was being given over to the minority. And the area that would have been given to the minority was almost equal in population between Arabs and Jews. So there was a negative reaction to the partition of the country at all. People felt it's a single country, it shouldn't be partitioned. But then the specifics of the partition were found unjust and unequal in the minority was being given most of the country.
But in the wake of the Holocaust, world leaders felt compelled to do something for the Jewish people. In the United States, President Truman was facing re-election and intense lobbying by Zionist leaders. As a result of those pressures, he began supporting the UN partition plan.
Truman, you might say, unleashed American diplomats to threaten certain countries. So you change your vote or else. And it worked. The vote passed to have partition.
That's it, ladies and gentlemen. Partition passed 33-13. And is this crowd excited? They're starting their horror dances now. All over the square, little circles are forming. People are laughing and crying and shouting and whirling around in the wild horror dance.
The British had announced that they would complete the evacuation of Palestine on the 15th of May. Zionist leaders began preparing for a Jewish state. On March 10th, the Haganah adopted Plan Dalet, also known as Plan D. This plan outlined an overall strategy for the Jewish militia. Its stated goal was to prepare the coming Hebrew state to defend itself once the British Army had left. But historians strongly disagree about the intentions of the plan.
It's geared, and it says that it's geared, to securing the Jewish state and the border areas and the main roads between the Jewish urban concentrations, to securing the Jewish state in advance of the Arab invasion.
It's completely ridiculous. I mean, it's very clear that Plan Dalet was a plan not just to take over, but to empty of their population all of these villages and cities. Now, were there people who understood that writing down on paper, we will expel this population, was probably not a wise thing to do? Yes. But was there a clear intention implemented to the letter to expel the populations? And more importantly, not to let them return? There was.
The most important part of Plan D was the set of orders that came outside of Plan D. The orders were strikingly clear and unambiguous and used the word letaher in Hebrew, which is to cleanse, or to destroy, which is lehashmid, or to expel, which is legaresh. I think the role of the historian is to fuse these military orders with the plan itself, and then you get an idea of the intention and the implementation.
In October, the truce came to an end and fighting resumed.
By this time, all the Arab armies had been pretty much defeated, and the Israeli army was the dominant force.
The Israeli army focused on clearing out villages in the two parts of the country where Palestinians remained, the Galilee in the north and the Negev Desert in the south. Hava Keller arrived in the town of Beersheba in the Negev shortly after it was captured by the Israelis on October 21st.
We prepared several buses. I think there was 10 or 12 buses, and we called all the Arabs from Beersheba to come to the buses. And I was standing like everybody with a gun, so nobody will try to run away, and all of them will go into the cars and go to Gaza. And they are in Gaza today, until today.
Nobody had an idea that this is a complete expulsion.
Don't tell me that nobody was forced to leave home. Everybody was forced to leave home.
There is consensus on the fact that there was a large-scale displacement of Palestinians. There is also consensus on the fact that this displacement was forced. Some people fled out of fear. Some people fled because there were massacres. Some people fled because rumors were spread about massacres. And some people fled because they didn't just flee, they were actually actively expelled at gunpoint. All of this happened. What remains is the question of whether there was a plan of ethnic cleansing that was designed ahead of time and then systematically implemented during the 1947 and 48 war. And on this question, historians are divided.
Now, the Arabs always maintain propagandistically it was a big expulsion. The fact is that most people simply fled the battle zones. In other words, the Jews attacked the militia bases, and during the attacks, or in fear of the attacks even before attacks occurred, Arabs began to flee.
I don't know how much hangs on this. Either way, the tragedy is clear. Now, what historians do know, and that there is no doubt about, is that the war through which Israel was born was a set of events that, with the same breath, were the destruction of Palestine and the displacement of at least 750,000 Palestinians. That is uncontrovertible.
Refugees from the 1948 war and their descendants now number over 5 million. Many have spent their entire lives in the same refugee camps, in the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, Syria, Jordan, and Lebanon. The tents have been replaced by concrete buildings, but living conditions have seen little improvement. Many of these camps have been struck by war over the decades, forcing some to become refugees 2 and 3 times over. The Zionist movement was successful in establishing the State of Israel. But the dream of a safe haven for the Jewish people has not been realized. Since the end of the 1948 war, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has only grown more complicated and intractable. And the hopes, fears, and grievances that drove the conflict in 1948 are still central to the conflict today. Israelis build more and more settlements in the occupied West Bank, and Palestinians continue to be cut off from their homes and livelihood by military occupation, home demolition, checkpoints, curfews, and the construction of a wall that runs deep into Palestinian territory. As a result, Israel now controls nearly all of historic Palestine.
Here's the question. Was the establishment of the State of Israel so important that no matter what price Palestinians had to pay for it, it was worth it? Or was there something fundamentally wrong with a project that can only be realized by displacing hundreds of thousands of people?